Hello, welcome to my video. Today I'm going to cover a game from Isle of Man 2019. White was Belarusian Grandmaster Vladislav Kovalev and black was Hikaru Nakamura. This was actually the qualification for candidates to 2020 and Hikaru Nakamura was among the leading players. Here he was black, they played Sicilian, and Kovalev here chose to play Rossolimo with bishop b5, now g6 by Nakamura. White took on c6, bc. It's also possible to capture with the d-pawn. The idea is to go bishop g7, e5 and to reroute this knight somehow to e6 and to control d4. This was played many times in the match between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana in 2018. Nakamura chose to play bc, white castles. Bishop g7, just developing, and now rook e1. And here if black does something natural like developing knight f6, white can expand in the center with e5, knight d5 and go c4. And white has more space here. White is more pleasant to play. He plays knight h6 here. Knight on h6 looks bad here, but black wants to push at some point f5 and to get his knight back to f7 to try to challenge white's center. Now white plays c3, trying to get to push d4 at some point. Black castles and now h3. Both sides are not developed just yet. On the white side it's only a knight on f3, on black side it's just a bishop and this poor knight on h6, so there is still development to be done. And like I said before, black goes for f5, tries to break this center. And naturally, white doesn't accept the offer of the exchange because that would just bring the knight into the play. He plays e5 here, tries to keep the position blocked and still keeping this knight very bad on h6. So that's why black chose to reroute it to f7 and now d4, supporting this pawn on e5. In this case it's also possible to go for d3. Seemingly more modest move, but it also has its purpose. And the purpose is to keep this bishop pretty much dead. Because if bishop a6, to try to somehow activate this bishop, you can just go c4 and keep this bishop pretty bad on a6. It's just hitting into a wall on the queen side, and there is going to be a very big issue with this bishop. After d3, if black plays e6, then white can just continue developing by knight bd2. And on g5, which is a very typical motive in this position, now knight c4 is very good, keeping the control over e5, and here it's white who has a slight advantage. Kovalev chose to play more concretely with d4. Hikaru took cd and now bishop b7. His problem is this bishop and he wants to activate it even if the price is to give up the pawn by pushing c5. Now white develops and now c5 was played. So Hikaru is ready to sacrifice a pawn, but in return he gets his pieces more active. His bishop is the one piece which is bad. Also there are some pieces left that need to be more active, like knight on f7 and bishop on g7. But for the start, this bishop on b7 is now more active. And here white took on c5, which is a bit strange, accepting the gambit and making this bishop more active. I think it was more promising to just play d5 to block even this bishop. And here what should black do? If he tries to undermine this pawn on d5 by playing e6, after bishop e3, he attacks the pawn on c5, and now capturing on e5 leads to some exchanges and going bishop c5, after which you cannot play d6 because of d6, and now you cannot take on c3 because of e7. If you capture on c5, then takes, rook f d8, and now rook takes e5. White's a pawn up. This is that extra pawn, which is very dangerous. So here actually on bishop c5 the best move is to take on c3, which looks really counterintuitive because you give up the bishop which protects all the dark squares around the king. But after bc, rook e8, this could hold for black. After capturing, he would eventually lose the pawn, but because we have opposite color bishops, chances for a draw are higher than in any other case. But instead he took on c5 and now e6 first. With e6 he is preparing to play g5 and to go g4 to undermine this pawn on e5. Here Kovalev plays bishop e3. And now Hikaru strikes with g5. He wants to capture on e5 without exchanging pieces, because a move like knight e5 here would lead to mass exchanges. Takes, bishop h4 probably, and then bishop has to go back to g7, after which there is no bishop pair and there is this backward d7 pawn, which would be a liability for black. So that's not something that Hikaru wanted. He wanted to capture this pawn without any exchanges. He plays g5 here, trying to go for g4 and then to capture on e5 by knight. Here white makes a move which is, I would say it's something like a time trouble move, something that you make out of panic. He played knight h2, which I couldn't understand really. For example, if he tried rook c1 here, now g4, takes. Now if knight moves to d4, then you just capture on e5 and black is more than fine. He plays knight h2, escaping with the knight. Now bishop takes and bishop d4. He's offering a trade, but black trades bishop for knight, not bishop for bishop. He takes on h2, king takes, and now queen c7. He wants to push e5 to make this bishop passive and to make it not dangerous for black's king. White goes back to g1 and now e5. Now bishop goes to e3, which is very logical. But there was a very interesting line here. If white took on e5, you might think this is just a piece sacrifice and there's nothing special there, but after knight e5, white goes knight d5. And now if queen goes to b8 to keep defending this knight, now we have a check, king g7, and now queen d4. Now we have a very unpleasant pin along this diagonal, and if bishop e4 to cover this, which is the only move that saves the knight, now white can take on f5, rook takes, and rook e4. Once white doubles on the e-file, he will put pressure on the knight. d7 pawn is also weak, black has to step away from the pin, lots of problems for black in that case. After knight d5 here, black has to capture to count on some advantage. Queen takes and knight f7 back, because the knight will be taken if king or rook just covers. But now rook e7. Now you're pinning the knight on f7. It's not easy for black to untangle from this. If he tries rook a e8, now white just supports his rook, and if these exchanges occur, then he might try with queen c6, but after that white just takes the pawn, and after d6, for example, to save the pawn on d7, white takes, queen d6 and rook a7, and white has 3 pawns for a piece. Black is also very passive, he cannot move his piece because of potential checkmate on h7 or even g5 pawn, which is loose. And with those 2 pawns on the queen side, I think it's objectively equal, but practically speaking, I think white has good chances as well. He went for bishop e3, but now after f4, bishop c1, the bishop gets very passive on c1, queen takes on d7, but now rook a b8. It's not easy to develop for white. Queen g4 back, rook f d8, and now h4. Hikaru plays a very nice move here. He plays rook d3. After hg, black would have rook g3, and the g2 pawn would be taken on the next move. So in this position, white tries to blockade with knight e4. Black took, rook takes, and now rook bd8. The idea is to play rook d1 and capture on f2 with a potential checkmate threat. The best chance for white to continue playing was to take on f4 immediately, and if ef, then rook f4. Now, as you can see, white has 2 pawns for a piece. Black's king is very vulnerable, so he would have some chances to survive. He went for rook e1, which appears to be a decisive mistake. Queen d4 now, stopping any untangling move like b3 or something else, and now rook d1 is a big threat. White tries to play a4 to get his rook out, but now rook d1. And if white exchanges by rook d1, queen takes, king h2, and now knight h6 would be very strong. Now this is a very powerful pin on the first rank. There's no time for b3 because of knight g4 and the checkmate on h1. If white plays g3, then just f3, keeping the king in the cage, and on g4 to somehow stop knight g4, because b3 now also leads to a checkmate, like this. So after g4, still capture, king g3, rook g1, and just take on h4 and start running with the pawn. After f3 to stop knight g4, now black has g4, with the idea of playing g3 and rook h1. And if white captures, of course we have the same idea. So he tried to play queen e2 here, but after capturing queen e1, queen d1, we would have the same line. White tries with king f1, but after queen c2, now the threat is rook d1 simply. After bishop f4, black took, and being a piece down, white resigned here. In round 10, I think Nakamura played against Aronian, he drew, and in the last round he played against Fabiano Caruana, but he didn't manage to beat him, he made a draw. He wasn't qualified for the candidates, after which he didn't play a single OTB classical game, which is remarkable for a player of such strength to not play a game for 2 years. And now he's not able to participate in Grand Prix to qualify for the candidates because he didn't play a classical game for 2 years. I think the requirement is to play at least 9 games in the past year, I would say. If you have any questions about the game, please let me know in the comment section. I will get back to you. I'll see you very soon. Bye bye.